The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the 42nd floor conference room of Sterling Global Industries as Marcus Chen pushed his cleaning cart through the door. It was 11:30 at night, well past the time when executives should have gone home to their families, but the voices inside were sharp, with tension and desperation. He'd been cleaning these offices for 3 years, invisible to the men and women who shaped billion-dollar deals. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, the numbers on the presentation screen made his stomach drop with recognition. Marcus paused, his hand tightening on the handle of his mop as he listened to the heated discussion. The contract details projected on the wall showed figures that he'd seen before, numbers that had haunted his sleep for the past 4 years. Avalon Industries, $15 billion acquisition, promising revolutionary technology that would transform Sterling Global's position in the renewable energy market. What the executives didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand from their leather chairs and expensive suits, was that Marcus had been inside Avalon Industries when it collapsed. He'd been the senior financial analyst who'd tried to warn everyone that the technology was fundamentally flawed, that the patents were built on falsified research, that the whole company was a house of cards waiting to fall. That warning had cost him everything: his career, his reputation, his marriage. His wife Sarah couldn't handle the stress of his whistleblowing lawsuit, the death threats from Avalon's investors, the financial ruin that followed when he was blacklisted from every major firm on Wall Street. She'd left when their daughter Emma was just 2 years old, taking half of what little they had left and disappearing into a new life that didn't include the man who'd chosen principles over prosperity. Now Emma was 6, a bright-eyed first grader, who thought her daddy was the strongest man in the world because he could carry her on his shoulders all the way to the playground. She had no idea that he'd once commanded respect in boardrooms like this one, that his analysis had guided million-dollar investments, that he'd given up a corner office and a 6-figure salary to push a mop and empty trash bins. All she knew was that Daddy picked her up from after-school care every day at exactly 5:15, helped her with homework at their small kitchen table, and read her stories until she fell asleep in their tiny one-bedroom apartment. The voices in the conference room grew more heated, and Marcus found himself moving closer to the massive oak table where 12 executives sat surrounded by documents and laptops. Victoria Sterling, the company's brilliant 34-year-old CEO, stood at the head of the table, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, her designer suit immaculate despite the late hour. She'd built Sterling Global from her father's modest manufacturing company into a renewable energy powerhouse, and everyone in the room knew that this Avalon acquisition was supposed to be her crowning achievement. "The technology specifications are unprecedented," she was saying, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about a major business decision. "Avalon's solar conversion efficiency ratings are 40% higher than anything currently on the market. If we can integrate their patents with our manufacturing capacity, we'll have a monopoly on next-generation renewable energy systems for at least 5 years." Richard Blackwood, the chief financial officer, nodded enthusiastically as he gestured to the financial projections. "The return on investment is projected at 300% over the first 3 years. Even accounting for integration costs and market uncertainties, we're looking at profits that will triple our current annual revenue." Marcus felt his chest tighten as he listened to the same optimistic projections, the same technological promises, the same financial fantasies that had seduced investors 4 years ago. He'd sat in meetings exactly like this one, watching brilliant people convince themselves that too good to be true actually meant revolutionary breakthrough. The only difference was that now he was invisible, just another service worker whose presence barely registered in the consciousness of the people making decisions that would affect thousands of jobs and billions of dollars. James Morrison, the head of strategic planning, spread additional documents across the table with the enthusiasm of a man who believed he was participating in history. Avalon's research division has 17 Nobel Prize candidates on staff. Their peer review publications in the Journal of Advanced Energy Systems are groundbreaking, The due diligence team spent 6 months reviewing their operations, and everything checks out. That was the moment Marcus knew he couldn't stay silent. The due diligence team would have been shown exactly what Avalon wanted them to see. The same carefully curated facilities and hand-picked researchers that had fooled investors 4 years ago. The real research, the failed experiments and falsified data that Marcus had uncovered during his own investigation, would be buried so deep that even the most thorough review wouldn't find it. He set down his mop and took a step closer to the table, his heart pounding with the knowledge that he was about to cross a line that would change everything. The executives didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in their excitement about profit margins and market dominance to pay attention to the middle-aged man in a gray uniform who had suddenly stopped cleaning. "Excuse me," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely carrying across the room. The conversation continued for another few seconds before Victoria Sterling looked up, her green eyes showing mild irritation at the interruption. "Yes? What is it?" Marcus took a deep breath, thinking of Emma asleep in their apartment 12 miles away, trusting him to provide the stability and security that had been missing from her short life. What he was about to do could cost him his job. The health insurance that covered Emma's asthma medications, the steady paycheck that kept their small apartment and put food on their table. But staying silent would cost Sterling Global $15 billion and potentially destroy the lives of everyone who worked for the company. "That contract will bankrupt you," he said, his voice growing stronger as he stepped fully into the light cast by the conference room's chandelier.
The room fell absolutely silent. 12 of the most powerful executives in the renewable energy industry stared at the janitor who had just claimed their biggest deal would destroy their company. Richard Blackwood's face flushed red with indignation, while James Morrison looked around the table as if seeking confirmation that what had just happened was real. "Security," Richard called out, reaching for the phone on the table. "We have a situation in the executive conference room." But Victoria Sterling held up her hand, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. There was something in his expression, a certainty and intelligence that didn't match his uniform or his position. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Let him speak." Marcus felt the weight of their stares, the hostility and curiosity and dismissal, all focused on him like a spotlight. These people had never seen him as anything more than part of the building's infrastructure, as invisible and unremarkable as the cleaning supplies in his cart. Now he was standing in their space, challenging their judgment, claiming knowledge that none of them believed he could possibly possess. "I know you have no reason to listen to me," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I'm just the guy who empties your trash and mops your floors. But I've been watching this deal develop for months, and I've seen these numbers before. 4 years ago, to be exact, when Avalon Industries went through their first major acquisition attempt." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. "Their first attempt? Avalon has been privately held since its founding. There's no record of any previous acquisition discussions." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's because the first attempt was buried so deep that most people don't even know it happened. But I was there. I was the senior financial analyst for Morrison Webb Partners when we were hired to evaluate Avalon for Sentinel Energy Corporation. Same technology promises, same efficiency ratings, same Nobel Prize candidates on staff." The mention of Morrison Webb Partners caused a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. It was a prestigious firm, known for its rigorous analysis and conservative approach to high-risk investments. Richard Blackwood frowned, his fingers pausing over the phone as he processed this unexpected revelation. "Sentinel Energy pulled out of that deal at the last minute," James Morrison said slowly, his strategic planning background making him more familiar with industry history than the others. There were rumors about irregularities in Avalon's research data, but nothing was ever proven. Marcus felt a bitter smile cross his face. Nothing was proven because Avalon's legal team was very good at making problems disappear, but the irregularities were real. The efficiency ratings were based on laboratory conditions that couldn't be replicated in real-world applications. The patents were built on research data that had been systematically falsified over a period of 3 years. And the Nobel Prize candidates? He shook his head. 2 of them had already left the company by the time we conducted our investigation. The rest were window dressing, prominent names attached to research they'd never actually supervised. Victoria Sterling stood slowly, her full attention now focused on this unexpected source of information. And you know this how exactly? If you were a financial analyst 4 years ago, what are you doing cleaning offices now? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus knew that his answer would determine whether they listened to him or had him escorted from the building by security. He thought of Emma again, of the bedtime story he'd read to her just 6 hours ago, of the way she'd looked up at him with complete trust and asked if he would always take care of her. "Because I reported what I found," Marcus said simply. "I wrote a detailed analysis showing that Avalon Industries was essentially committing fraud on a massive scale. I presented it to my supervisors, to Sentinel Energy's board, to anyone who would listen. And for my trouble, I was fired, blacklisted, and sued for industrial espionage and breach of confidentiality."
The silence in the room was deafening. Richard Blackwood slowly replaced the phone receiver, while several other executives exchanged glances that mixed skepticism with growing concern. This wasn't the rambling of a disgruntled employee or the desperate attention-seeking of someone with mental health issues. This was specific, detailed information delivered with the calm authority of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. "Avalon's legal team destroyed my career," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke the truth he'd been carrying for 4 years. "They made sure I could never work in financial analysis again. They froze my assets during the lawsuit, forced me into bankruptcy, and ensured that no reputable firm would ever hire me. My wife left, my house was foreclosed, and I ended up here because it was the only job I could find that didn't require references from my previous career." Victoria walked slowly around the table until she was standing directly across from Marcus, her green eyes studying his face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "If what you're saying is true, if Avalon really is built on fraudulent research, then why hasn't anyone else discovered it? We've had independent analysts review their technology. We've conducted our own due diligence." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Because Avalon has had 4 years to perfect their deception. They know exactly what questions investigators ask, exactly what documents they want to see, exactly which facilities they need to tour. They've turned corporate fraud into an art form, and they're very good at it." "This is insane," Richard Blackwood interjected, his voice tight with frustration. "We're supposed to abandon a $15 billion acquisition because a janitor has conspiracy theories about a company that tried to discredit him 4 years ago." But James Morrison was leaning forward now, his strategic mind clearly working through the implications of what Marcus was saying. "What specifically should we be looking for? If you're right, if there are problems with their research data, there should be evidence we can verify." Marcus felt a spark of hope. This was the opening he needed, the chance to share information that could save Sterling Global from making the same mistake that had destroyed his own life. The efficiency ratings are based on tests conducted under specific atmospheric conditions that don't exist in normal solar installations. They use specialized equipment to create artificial atmospheric pressure and humidity levels that enhance solar conversion rates by 30 to 40%. But in real-world conditions, their panels perform worse than conventional technology. He pulled out his phone, a cheap device that was several generations behind the latest models, and scrolled through files he'd been compiling for months. "I've been tracking Avalon's test installations around the country, the ones that are supposed to be demonstrating their breakthrough technology. Most of them are underperforming so badly that they've been quietly shut down or converted to conventional solar systems." Victoria extended her hand. "Show me." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then handed over his phone. The screen displayed a detailed spreadsheet with locations, installation dates, and performance data for 17 different Avalon test sites. Victoria scrolled through the information, her expression growing more serious with each entry. "These performance numbers," she said slowly, "they're significantly lower than what Avalon provided in their technology demonstrations." "Because the demonstrations were carefully staged," Marcus explained. "The test sites they show to potential investors are equipped with the specialized atmospheric control systems I mentioned. But the real installations, the ones that are supposed to prove their technology works in normal conditions, are disasters." Richard Blackwood stood up abruptly, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and growing panic. "Even if this is true, we've already committed to the acquisition. The contracts are signed, the financing is in place. We can't just walk away from a deal this size." "Actually," Victoria said quietly, her eyes still focused on Marcus's phone, "we can. The acquisition is contingent on technology verification and performance benchmarks. If their technology doesn't meet the specifications they've guaranteed, we have grounds to void the contract." The room erupted in competing voices as the executives began to grasp the magnitude of what Marcus was suggesting. Some argued for proceeding with the acquisition, insisting that their own due diligence was more reliable than the theories of a disgraced analyst. Others demanded immediate verification of Marcus's claims, recognizing that $15 billion was too much to risk on assumptions. Through it all, Victoria Sterling remained silent, her attention focused on the data Marcus had provided. Finally, she looked up, her green eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him feel like she was seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. "Mr." She paused, realizing she didn't know his name. "Chen, Marcus Chen. Mr. Chen, what would it take to verify what you're telling us? If we wanted to conduct our own investigation of these test sites, what would we need to do?" Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. This was the moment he'd been hoping for, the chance to prevent Sterling Global from making the same mistake that had destroyed Sentinel Energy and countless smaller investors. "You'd need to visit the real installations, not the showcase sites they've been using for demonstrations. You'd need to test their panels under actual field conditions, with independent equipment and atmospheric monitoring. And most importantly, you'd need to do it without giving Avalon advance notice." "That would take weeks," James Morrison protested. "The acquisition is scheduled to close in 10 days. If we delay now, Avalon could withdraw their offer or demand better terms." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, weighing the competing pressures of due diligence and deal timing. Finally, she turned back to Marcus with a decision in her eyes. "If I arranged for independent verification of your claims, would you be willing to participate in the investigation? Your knowledge of Avalon's operations could be invaluable." The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities that Marcus had never dared to imagine. A chance to use his expertise again, to contribute to something important, to prove that his analysis had been right all along. But it also meant risking everything he'd built in the 3 years since his life had fallen apart. If he was wrong, if Avalon really had developed revolutionary technology, he would be responsible for costing Sterling Global the opportunity of a lifetime. "I have a daughter," Marcus said quietly, thinking of Emma sleeping peacefully in their small apartment. "She's 6 years old and she depends on me. If I help you and this goes wrong, if Avalon comes after me again, I could lose everything, including my job here." Victoria's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she looked less like a powerful CEO and more like a woman who understood the weight of difficult choices. "I can't promise there won't be risks, Mr. Chen. But I can promise that if you help us uncover the truth, Sterling Global will protect you from retaliation. And if your analysis saves us from making a catastrophic mistake, you'll be compensated accordingly." Marcus looked around the room at the faces watching him expectantly. These people had the power to shape industries, to create or destroy thousands of jobs, to influence the direction of renewable energy development for years to come. And they were asking for his help. trusting his judgment, recognizing his expertise despite the uniform he wore and the mop he carried. He thought of Emma again, of the future he wanted to build for her, of the man he wanted to be in her eyes. Not just someone who provided stability and security, but someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. "I'll help," Marcus said, his voice firm with decision. "But I need to make arrangements for my daughter. And I need your word that if this investigation proves I'm right, Sterling Global will make sure the truth comes out, even if it's uncomfortable for the industry." Victoria Sterling extended her hand across the conference table, and as Marcus shook it, he felt the weight of his old life and his new one converging in a moment that would change everything for both of them. "You have my word, Mr. Chen. Now let's figure out how to expose the truth about Avalon Industries." The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Marcus grateful for the extra sweater he'd packed in Emma's backpack. As they walked the 4 blocks to Roosevelt Elementary, she chattered excitedly about her upcoming school presentation on community helpers, completely unaware that her father's life had taken a dramatic turn just 8 hours earlier. "Mrs. Patterson says we each have to interview someone who helps make our neighborhood better," Emma explained, skipping slightly to keep up with Marcus's longer stride. "I want to interview you, Daddy, because you keep all the office buildings clean and safe." Marcus's chest tightened with a mixture of pride and guilt. In Emma's 6-year-old world, his job was noble and important, worthy of a school presentation. She had no idea that he'd once commanded respect in boardrooms, that his signature had once appeared on documents worth millions of dollars, that his fall from grace had been so complete and so public that former colleagues crossed the street to avoid acknowledging him. "That sounds like a wonderful project, sweetheart," he said, kneeling down to zip her jacket as they reached the school's front steps. "But remember, there are lots of different ways to help people. Sometimes the most important help happens when no one is watching." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened as she spotted her best friend Sophia getting out of a car across the street. "Can I tell Mrs. Patterson that you're also really good at math? Because you helped me with those word problems last night, and you explained them better than anyone." "You can tell Mrs. Patterson whatever you want," Marcus said, kissing the top of her head. "Now go learn something amazing, and I'll see you at pickup time." As he watched Emma run toward the school entrance, her backpack bouncing with each step, Marcus felt the familiar ache of wanting to give her more. Not just material things, though their tiny apartment and second-hand clothes were constant reminders of their circumstances, but opportunities. Private schools with smaller class sizes, music lessons, summer camps, college savings accounts that would give her choices he'd never had. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria Sterling, sent at 6:30 in the morning, with the efficiency of someone who never stopped working. "Team meeting at 8 a.m. Conference room B, 15th floor. Can you arrange childcare coverage for next 3 days?" Marcus stared at the message, reality settling over him like a weight. Victoria Sterling was offering him a chance to use his expertise again, to contribute something meaningful, but it would mean disrupting the carefully constructed routine that kept Emma's world stable and predictable. Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who sometimes watched Emma when Marcus worked weekend shifts, wouldn't be able to handle 3 full days of childcare, and the after-school program at Roosevelt Elementary only ran until 6 o'clock. He typed back quickly, "We'll be there, working on childcare arrangements." The Sterling Global building looked different in the morning light, less imposing somehow, though no less impressive. Marcus had always arrived for his cleaning shifts after dark, when the executive floors were empty and quiet. Now, entering through the main lobby during business hours, he felt exposed and out of place in his best khakis and the navy button-down shirt he'd bought at Target 2 years ago. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave him time to prepare mentally for what was about to happen. In a few minutes, he would be sitting in a conference room with people who made more money in a month than he earned in a year, discussing deals that could reshape entire industries. 4 years ago, he would have belonged in that room. Now he was there only because Victoria Sterling had chosen to listen to a janitor's warning about a $15 billion mistake. Conference room B was smaller than the executive suite where they'd met the night before, but it still radiated the quiet luxury that characterized everything about Sterling Global. Victoria stood at the head of a polished oak table, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the severe bun she'd worn during their first encounter. She wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Marcus earned in 3 months, but her green eyes showed the strain of someone who'd spent most of the night making difficult decisions. "Mr. Chen," she said as he entered, gesturing to a chair halfway down the table. "Thank you for coming. I hope the early hour wasn't a problem with your daughter's schedule." "Emma's school starts at 8:15, Marcus replied, settling into the leather chair and noting how different it felt from the plastic folding chairs in the school's parent conference room. "This works fine." Victoria nodded, then turned to address the other 3 people in the room. "Before we begin, I want to establish some ground rules. What we discuss here is strictly confidential. Mr. Chen has provided information that could significantly impact our Avalon acquisition, and we need to verify his claims quickly and quietly." She gestured to a thin man with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "This is David Park, our head of corporate security. He'll be coordinating the field investigation of Avalon's installations." Her hand moved to a younger woman with dark hair and an intense expression. "Sarah Williams, our Chief Technology Officer. She'll be handling the technical verification of Avalon's research claims." Finally, she indicated a man in his 50s whose expensive suit couldn't quite hide the weathered hands of someone who'd worked his way up from the ground floor. "And Robert Martinez, our Director of Strategic Operations. He has experience with complex corporate investigations." Marcus nodded to each of them, acutely aware that he was probably the least educated person in the room. David Park had the bearing of someone with military or law enforcement background, while Sarah Williams looked like she could have stepped out of any Silicon Valley startup. Robert Martinez studied Marcus with the calculating gaze of someone who was used to evaluating people's reliability under pressure. "Mr. Chen," Victoria continued, "I've spent most of the night reviewing your background and the information you provided yesterday. I've also had preliminary conversations with our legal team about the potential implications of what you're alleging." She pressed a button on the conference table, and a large screen descended from the ceiling, displaying a map of the United States dotted with red markers. "These are the Avalon installations you identified in your research. David's team has already begun preliminary surveillance of the sites closest to us, and what they've found is concerning." David Park leaned forward, his expression grim. 3 of the installations Mr. Chen identified appear to have been shut down within the past 6 months. 2 others are operating at significantly reduced capacity. This is inconsistent with Avalon's claims about the success of their field testing program. Sarah Williams opened a laptop and began typing rapidly. "I've also been reviewing the peer-reviewed papers that Avalon has published in the Journal of Advanced Energy Systems. The methodology sections contain some unusual specifications that I initially attributed to proprietary technology, but now I'm wondering if they might be describing the atmospheric control systems Mr. Chen mentioned." Marcus felt a surge of validation mixed with apprehension. These people were taking his claims seriously, applying their considerable resources to verify information he'd gathered through months of careful research during his off hours. But he also knew that if his analysis was wrong, if Avalon really had developed breakthrough technology, he would be responsible for derailing a deal that could make Sterling Global the dominant player in renewable energy. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" Robert Martinez asked, his voice carrying the no-nonsense tone of someone who'd managed complex operations before. "The acquisition is scheduled to close in 9 days. If we're going to pull out, we need definitive proof, not just suspicions." Victoria walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline, where construction cranes marked the locations of new buildings that would eventually need renewable energy systems. "That's why we're going to move fast and quietly. David, I want teams at the 3 closest Avalon installations by tomorrow morning. Sarah, you'll accompany them to conduct on-site technical evaluations. Robert, You'll coordinate with our legal team to identify exactly what kind of evidence we need to trigger the contract's technology verification clauses. She turned back to Marcus, her green eyes intense with the focus of someone who'd built a billion-dollar company through decisive action. And Mr. Chen, I want you to come with us. Your knowledge of what to look for could be the difference between finding the truth and being shown another carefully orchestrated demonstration. The request hit Marcus like a physical blow. Traveling with the Sterling Global team would mean days away from Emma, disrupting her routine in ways that could take weeks to repair. But it would also mean using his expertise in a meaningful way for the first time in 4 years, contributing to something important, proving that his analysis had value beyond emptying trash cans and mopping floors. I need to arrange care for my daughter, he said carefully. She's only 6, and she's not used to me being away overnight. Victoria's expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the woman behind the CEO persona. Of course, we can provide assistance with childcare arrangements if needed. This investigation is too important to let logistical issues prevent you from participating. Robert Martinez cleared his throat diplomatically. With respect, Ms. Sterling, bringing Mr. Chen on a corporate investigation could create liability issues. If Avalon discovers what we're doing and decides to take legal action, having someone involved who's already been targeted by their legal team could complicate our position. The objection hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of being defined by his past failures rather than his current abilities. He'd faced similar concerns from every employer who'd considered hiring him after the Avalon lawsuit, the assumption that his presence would somehow contaminate any legitimate business activity. But Victoria Sterling was already shaking her head. Mr. Chen's previous experience with Avalon makes him more valuable, not less. He knows their tactics, their methods of deception, their weak points. We need that knowledge if we're going to uncover the truth in the limited time we have. She looked directly at Marcus, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to making final decisions. The question is whether you're willing to take the risk. If we're right, if Avalon really is built on fraudulent research, this investigation could vindicate everything you tried to expose 4 years ago. But if we're wrong, if Avalon's technology is legitimate, it could put you in an even more vulnerable position. Marcus thought of Emma, probably sitting in her first-grade classroom at that very moment, raising her hand to answer questions about addition problems or reading comprehension. She trusted him completely, believed without question that he would always be there to pick her up after school, help with homework, read bedtime stories, and keep their small world safe and predictable.
But he also thought about the night 4 years ago when he'd sat in his home office, staring at financial documents that proved Avalon Industries was defrauding investors on a massive scale. He'd known that reporting what he'd found would probably destroy his career, but he'd also known that staying silent would make him complicit in a fraud that would eventually cost thousands of people their jobs and billions of dollars in lost investments. "I'll do it," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty churning in his stomach. "But I need help arranging care for Emma, and I need your word that if this investigation proves Avalon is fraudulent, Sterling Global will make sure the evidence becomes public, even if it's embarrassing for the industry." Victoria extended her hand across the conference table. "You have my word, Mr. Chen, and you have my commitment that Sterling Global will support you through whatever consequences this investigation brings." As Marcus shook her hand, he noticed that her grip was firm and her palms were slightly calloused, suggesting that despite her privileged position, she wasn't afraid of hard work. There was something in her eyes, too, a recognition that they were about to embark on something that could change both of their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. "All right," Victoria said, turning back to the team. "David, I want your advance team on the road within 2 hours. Sarah, prepare a full technical evaluation protocol. Robert, draft contingency plans for contract withdrawal. And Mr. Chen," she paused, meeting his eyes again. "Go home and explain to your daughter that Daddy has some important work to do that might help a lot of people." The next 2 days passed in a blur of careful preparation and mounting tension. Victoria had arranged for Emma to stay with the Castillo family, whose daughter Sophia was Emma's best friend at school. Mrs. Castillo was a warm, patient woman who worked as a teaching aide at Roosevelt Elementary, and Emma was thrilled at the prospect of an extended sleepover with her favorite classmate. "Are you going to be a business consultant again, Daddy?" Emma asked as Marcus packed his small suitcase with the few professional clothes he still owned. "Like you used to be before I was born?" Marcus knelt down to her level, studying the face that was so much like her mother's, but with his own dark eyes and stubborn chin. "I'm going to help some people solve a problem, sweetheart. It's kind of like the math word problems you do at school, except with grown-up things like companies and contracts."
Emma nodded seriously, then wrapped her arms around his neck in a hug that made his chest tight with love and worry. "Will you call me every night before bedtime?" "Every single night," Marcus promised. "And I'll be back in 3 days to hear all about your adventures with Sophia." The Sterling Global corporate jet was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The cabin was appointed with leather seats that reclined into beds, a conference table equipped with satellite internet, and a small kitchen stocked with gourmet food and beverages. As they flew toward their first destination, a supposedly successful Avalon installation in Nevada, Marcus found himself sitting across from Victoria Sterling, both of them reviewing technical documents on tablet computers. "Nervous?" Victoria asked, glancing up from a report on solar panel efficiency ratings. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. 4 years ago, I was absolutely certain that Avalon was fraudulent. I staked my career and my family's financial security on that certainty. If I'm wrong now, if their technology really works, then I've spent 4 years believing I was the victim of corporate persecution when I was actually just a failed analyst who couldn't recognize genuine innovation. Victoria set down her tablet and studied his face with the same intensity she'd shown during their first meeting. "What made you so certain 4 years ago? Was it just the numbers, or was there something else?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, remembering the late nights in his Morrison Webb partner's office, the growing sense of unease as he dug deeper into Avalon's research data. "It was the patterns," he said finally. "The efficiency improvements they claimed followed mathematical curves that were too perfect, too consistent across different environmental variables. Real breakthrough technology is messy. It works better in some conditions than others. It has unexpected limitations and surprising advantages. But Avalon's data looked like it had been designed by someone who understood how breakthrough technology should look on paper, not how it actually behaves in the real world." Victoria nodded slowly. "And when you reported those concerns, what happened?" "What?" "My immediate supervisor told me I was being too cautious, that revolutionary technology sometimes produced results that seemed too good to be true. The senior partners at Morrison Webb wanted the deal to proceed because Avalon was paying substantial consulting fees. Sentinel Energy's board was so excited about the potential profits that they didn't want to hear about possible problems." Marcus stared out the jet's window at the landscape passing below, remembering the isolation he'd felt as his concerns were dismissed by people who should have valued his expertise. "So I kept digging. I requested additional data, conducted independent verification tests, even flew out to examine some of Avalon's installations myself, and everything I found confirmed that their technology didn't work as advertised." "But you were the only one who saw the problems?" "I was the only one who was looking for them," Marcus corrected. "Everyone else was so focused on the potential upside that they didn't want to examine the downside risks. And Avalon was very good at showing people exactly what they wanted to see." The jet began its descent toward a small airport outside Las Vegas, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten with anticipation. In a few hours, he would finally have the chance to prove that his analysis had been correct, that his sacrifice of career and family stability had been justified. Or he would discover that he'd spent 4 years as a victim of his own paranoia and professional incompetence. As the wheels touched down on the Nevada runway, Victoria placed her hand briefly on his arm. "Whatever we find out there, Mr. Chen, I want you to know that I respect what you did 4 years ago. It takes courage to challenge a popular consensus, especially when you know the personal cost will be severe." Marcus met her eyes, seeing something in them that he hadn't expected. Genuine admiration mixed with understanding. "Thank you, Ms. Sterling. That means more than you know." The rental car that David Park had arranged was a practical sedan that looked utterly ordinary, perfect for conducting surveillance without attracting attention. As they drove through the Nevada desert toward the Avalon installation, Marcus found himself sitting in the passenger seat while Victoria drove, her hands steady on the wheel and her green eyes focused on the highway ahead. "Tell me about your daughter," she said, as they passed a sign indicating they were 30 miles from their destination. "Emma, what's she like?" The question surprised Marcus. In his experience, high-powered executives didn't typically show personal interest in their employees' family lives, especially employees whose qualifications were as questionable as his own. "She's incredible," he said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Smart, curious, kind. She has this way of seeing the world that makes everything seem possible. Last week she told me she wants to be a scientist who studies how to make flowers grow in space so that astronauts won't be lonely." Victoria smiled, the expression transforming her face from serious CEO to something warmer and more approachable. "She sounds remarkable. It must be challenging, raising her on your own." "It's the best thing I've ever done," Marcus replied without hesitation. "When Sarah left, I thought my life was over. I'd lost my career, my marriage, my financial security, everything I thought defined who I was. But Emma needed me. And taking care of her taught me that who you are isn't determined by your job title or your bank account. It's determined by how you treat the people who depend on you." They drove in comfortable silence for several miles, the desert landscape rolling past in waves of sand and scattered vegetation. Finally, Victoria spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "I've never had children," she said. "Never been married either. I've always been too focused on building the company, proving myself in an industry that doesn't always welcome women in leadership positions. Sometimes I wonder if I've missed something important." Marcus studied her profile, noting the slight tension around her eyes that suggested she was sharing something she didn't often discuss. "It's never too late," he said gently. "Success in business is valuable, but it's not the only kind of success that matters." Victoria glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to the road. "Your ex-wife, Sarah. Do you mind me asking what happened? I mean, I understand if it's too personal." Marcus was quiet for a moment, surprised to find that talking about Sarah didn't hurt as much as it used to. "She couldn't handle the uncertainty. When Avalon came after me with their lawsuit, when my income disappeared and our savings were frozen by court orders, she needed someone to blame. And I was an easy target because part of me blamed myself too. I kept thinking that if I'd been smarter, if I'd documented my findings better, if I'd built stronger relationships with my colleagues, maybe things would have turned out differently." "Do you still believe that?" Marcus shook his head. "Not anymore. I did the right thing, even though it cost me almost everything. And what it gave me in return, the chance to raise Emma, to build a life based on what really matters, rather than what looks impressive on paper, has been worth more than any career success could have been." As they crested a small hill, the Avalon installation came into view. Acres of solar panels arranged in precise geometric patterns, gleaming in the Nevada sun like a technological garden. From a distance, it looked impressive, even revolutionary. But Marcus knew that appearances could be deceiving, especially when someone had invested millions of dollars in creating the right impression. "There it is," Victoria said, slowing the car as they approached the installation's entrance. "Let's find out if you were right, Mr. Chen. Let's find out if Avalon Industries is everything they claim to be, or if they're the most sophisticated fraud in corporate history." The Avalon installation's security gate was unmanned, which David Park immediately flagged as unusual for a facility supposedly housing breakthrough technology worth billions of dollars. As they drove through the entrance, Marcus noticed that many of the solar panels showed signs of weather damage and neglect, their surfaces clouded with dust and desert sand that should have been regularly cleaned to maintain optimal efficiency. "This doesn't look like a flagship installation," Victoria observed, parking near a small administrative building that appeared largely abandoned. "Where are the maintenance crews, the monitoring equipment, the security personnel that Avalon claimed were essential for protecting their proprietary technology?" Sarah Williams was already out of the car, pulling sophisticated testing equipment from the trunk. As Sterling Global's chief technology officer, she had the expertise to conduct field evaluations that would either confirm or refute Marcus's claims about Avalon's performance data. "I'll need about 2 hours to run comprehensive tests on the panel arrays," she said, adjusting the settings on a device that measured solar conversion efficiency under real-world conditions. Marcus walked slowly through the installation, his trained eye cataloging details that told a story very different from Avalon's marketing materials. The inverters that converted solar energy to usable electricity were older models, not the cutting-edge systems that Avalon claimed were essential for their breakthrough performance. The wiring showed signs of frequent repairs, suggesting that the system experienced regular failures. Most tellingly, several panel arrays had been completely disconnected, their power cables coiled and abandoned like monuments to failed promises. "Over here," David Park called out from near the facility's monitoring station. "You need to see this." The monitoring station was supposed to provide real-time data on the installation's performance, but the screens were dark and the computer systems appeared to have been shut down months ago. David had managed to access some of the archived data files, and what he found confirmed Marcus's worst suspicions about Avalon's deception. According to these logs, the installation was producing less than 30% of its rated capacity, even under optimal conditions, David explained, scrolling through pages of performance data. "And look at this. They stopped collecting data entirely 6 months ago, right around the time they began serious discussions with Sterling Global about the acquisition." Victoria studied the data with the focused intensity of someone who'd built her career on making sense of complex information. "This is exactly what Mr. Chen predicted. Avalon has been using this installation as a showcase for potential investors, while hiding the fact that it's a complete failure." Sarah's voice carried across the desert air from where she was conducting her technical evaluation. "The efficiency ratings I'm measuring are catastrophically low," she called out. "These panels are performing worse than conventional solar technology from 10 years ago. Whatever Avalon's breakthrough technology is supposed to be, it's not working here." Marcus felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness as the evidence mounted. He'd been right 4 years ago, but proving it now wouldn't restore the career he'd lost or repair the damage to his family. It would, however, save Sterling Global from making the same mistake that had destroyed Sentinel Energy and countless smaller investors who'd believed in Avalon's promises. "We need to document everything," Victoria said, her CEO instincts taking over as she began to grasp the magnitude of what they'd discovered. "Photos, data files, technical measurements. If we're going to void the acquisition contract, we need irrefutable proof that Avalon has been systematically misrepresenting their technology's capabilities." As the team worked to gather evidence, Marcus's phone rang with a call from Mrs. Castillo. Emma had developed a fever at school and was asking for her father. The timing couldn't have been worse. But Marcus knew that his daughter's needs had to come first, regardless of how important this investigation might be for his professional redemption. "I have to go back," he told Victoria, explaining the situation with the kind of apologetic urgency that all working parents knew too well. "Emma's sick, and she needs me." Victoria's expression showed understanding rather than frustration. "Of course, David and Sarah can finish the documentation here. You've already provided the key insights we needed to uncover the truth." But as Marcus prepared to leave, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the facility's maintenance shed, she found documents that revealed the full scope of Avalon's deception. The company hadn't just been exaggerating their technology's performance. They'd been running an elaborate Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors to pay returns to earlier investors while systematically looting the company's research and development funds. "This goes far beyond false advertising," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger as she read through financial documents that showed millions of dollars in diverted funds. "Avalon's executives have been embezzling money while knowing their technology doesn't work. They've been planning to take the money from Sterling Global's acquisition and disappear, leaving us with worthless assets and massive legal liability." Victoria immediately called Robert Martinez, who was monitoring the situation from Sterling Global's headquarters. Within hours, the company's legal team had filed emergency injunctions to freeze Avalon's assets and prevent the acquisition from proceeding. The evidence Marcus had helped uncover was so overwhelming that Avalon's lawyers advised their clients to surrender rather than fight charges that would certainly result in criminal prosecution. The flight back to Chicago passed in a blur of legal consultations and media management as news of the aborted acquisition spread through the business world. Victoria spent most of the time on conference calls with board members and regulatory agencies, but she made sure to include Marcus in the discussions about how Sterling Global would handle the aftermath of exposing such a massive fraud. "The SEC wants to interview you about your original investigation of Avalon," she told Marcus as they prepared to land. "Your analysis 4 years ago will be crucial evidence in their criminal case against the company's executives." Marcus nodded, thinking about how strange it felt to be valued for the same expertise that had once made him unemployable. What happens now? To Sterling Global, I mean. Losing the Avalon acquisition must have major implications for your renewable energy strategy. Victoria smiled, and Marcus realized it was the first completely relaxed expression he'd seen from her since their initial meeting. "Actually, this could be the best thing that's happened to Sterling Global in years. We've avoided a catastrophic loss, and the money we would have spent on Avalon can now be invested in legitimate renewable energy research. We're going to build our own technology development program, and I'd like you to help lead it." The offer hit Marcus like a physical shock. "Lead it? Victoria, I'm a janitor. I haven't worked in corporate analysis for 4 years. I don't have the credentials or the connections or the current expertise to run a major technology initiative." "You have something more valuable than credentials," Victoria replied. "You have judgment. You have the ability to see through deception and identify real value. And you have the courage to speak up when something is wrong, even when the personal cost is severe. Those are exactly the qualities I need in someone who's going to help Sterling Global make smart decisions about the future." As their plane touched down in Chicago, Marcus felt the weight of possibility settling over him like a new season. For 4 years, he'd defined himself by what he'd lost: his career, his marriage, his financial security, his professional reputation. But now, sitting across from a woman who valued his judgment and wanted to rebuild his future, he began to think about what he might gain. The reunion with Emma was everything Marcus had hoped it would be. Despite her fever, she launched herself into his arms with the complete trust and unconditional love that only children could offer. As he carried her from Mrs. Castillo's house to their small apartment, she chattered about her adventures with Sophia and her excitement about hearing the results of Daddy's important business trip. "Did you solve the problem?" Emma asked as Marcus tucked her into bed with extra blankets and her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Did you help the people who needed help?" "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus said, smoothing her honey blonde hair away from her warm forehead. "I think we helped a lot of people avoid making a very expensive mistake." Emma nodded seriously, as if corporate fraud prevention was exactly the kind of work she expected her father to do. "Mrs. Castillo says you're probably going to get a better job because you're so smart about numbers and helping people. Does that mean we might move to a bigger apartment?" Marcus felt his chest tighten with love and hope as he looked at his daughter's trusting face. "Maybe, Em, but even if we do, we'll still be us. Still a team. Still taking care of each other." "Good," Emma said, settling deeper into her pillow. "I like being a team with you, Daddy. You're the best teammate ever." The next morning brought a formal job offer from Sterling Global that exceeded Marcus's wildest expectations. Director of Strategic Analysis, with a salary that would allow Emma to attend private school, take music lessons, and have the kind of opportunities that Marcus had dreamed of providing. The position came with comprehensive health insurance, a generous education allowance for Emma, and the respect of colleagues who valued his expertise rather than dismissing it. But perhaps most importantly, the job came with Victoria Sterling's commitment to creating a work environment that recognized the importance of family balance. "I've learned something important from watching you, Marcus," she said during their final negotiation meeting. "Success isn't just about building profitable companies. It's about building lives that honor our values and our relationships." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the conference room where he'd first confronted the Avalon acquisition, but this time he was presenting Sterling Global's new renewable energy strategy to a board of directors who hung on his every word. The company's legitimate research initiative was already showing promising results, and Marcus's analytical expertise had helped identify several genuine breakthrough technologies that could position Sterling Global as a leader in sustainable energy. As the presentation concluded and board members filed out with enthusiastic comments about the company's bright future, Victoria lingered behind, studying the charts and projections that covered the conference room walls. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Walking away from Avalon 4 years ago, I mean. The personal cost was so severe, and you had no way of knowing it would eventually lead to this." Marcus thought about the question seriously, considering the winding path that had brought him from a corner office to a janitor's cart to this moment of professional redemption. "I regret that it took so long for the truth to come out," he said finally. "I regret that Emma had to grow up with less because I chose principles over pragmatism. But I don't regret the choice itself. Some things are more important than career advancement or financial security." Victoria nodded, then surprised him by sharing something personal. "I've started volunteering at the Children's Literacy Program at Roosevelt Elementary. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, suggested it when I mentioned that I wanted to do more community involvement. Spending time with those kids has taught me that success has many different definitions." As they walked out of the conference room together, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that night, when he'd set down his mop and challenged a room full of executives. Emma was thriving in her new school, excited about the violin lessons she'd started and the science camp she'd attend that summer. Their new apartment had 2 bedrooms and a small balcony where Emma could tend the flower garden she'd insisted on planting. But perhaps the most significant change was the growing relationship between Marcus and Victoria, a connection that had begun with professional respect and evolved into something deeper and more personal. They'd been careful to keep their private feelings separate from their work responsibilities, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the spark that occurred whenever they were together. "Emma's school concert is next Thursday," Marcus said as they reached the elevator. "She's playing violin in the spring showcase. If you're not too busy with board meetings and acquisition strategies, you might enjoy it." Victoria's smile was warm and genuine. "I wouldn't miss it. Emma told me last week that she's been practicing a special song, and she wants to make sure I'm there to hear it." As the elevator doors closed, Marcus caught his reflection in the polished steel, and for the first time in 4 years, he liked what he saw. Not just the professional success or the financial security, but the peace that came from knowing he'd chosen integrity over convenience, family over career advancement, and truth over profitable deception. That evening, as he helped Emma with her homework at their new kitchen table, she looked up from her math problems with a question that made his heart skip. "Daddy, do you think Victoria would like to come to our family game night on Saturday? She doesn't have any kids of her own, so maybe she gets lonely sometimes." Marcus smiled at his daughter's intuitive understanding of the connections that were forming around them. "I think she'd love that, sweetheart. Should we call her and ask?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, already planning which games they'd play and what snacks they'd serve. As Marcus watched his daughter's excitement about expanding their small family circle, he realized that sometimes the most important victories weren't the ones that made headlines or generated profit margins. Sometimes they were as simple as a 6-year-old's invitation to join a family game night, offered with the generous heart of a child who understood that love multiplied rather than divided when it was shared. The phone call to Victoria was brief but meaningful. She accepted Emma's invitation with genuine enthusiasm, admitting that she'd never been included in a family game night and was looking forward to the experience. As Marcus hung up the phone, Emma announced her intention to bake cookies for their guest, because everyone feels more welcome when there are homemade treats. Standing in his new kitchen, watching his daughter plan their weekend entertainment with the serious attention she brought to all important matters, Marcus felt grateful for the winding path that had brought them to this moment. 4 years ago, he'd lost almost everything by telling the truth about corporate fraud. But in losing his old life, he'd gained something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that his principles mattered more than his position, that his integrity was worth more than his income, and that sometimes the most important victories came disguised as devastating defeats. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities that Marcus had never dared to imagine during the darkest days of his professional exile. Emma would grow up knowing that her father was someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Victoria had found in their small family the warmth and connection she'd been missing in her pursuit of corporate success. And Marcus had discovered that redemption sometimes came not through vindication, but through the patient building of a life based on love, honesty, and the courage to speak truth to power, even when the personal cost seemed too high to bear. As Emma hummed happily while planning their family game night, Marcus knew that this was what victory actually looked like. Not a dramatic courtroom vindication or a triumphant return to corporate glory, but a 6-year-old's laughter in a warm kitchen, the promise of friends joining their weekend traditions, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he'd chosen the right path, even when it led through valleys he'd never expected to walk.